Right, we're going to be talking about apple blossom today. So I have left behind one of the most beautiful trees in my past garden. So I'm doing this painting really to celebrate that beautiful tree because it was the most wonderful Bramley apple tree. And I'm going to miss it so much, even though I'm surrounded by orchard at my new place. None of them will be like my lovely Bramley apple tree, which was truly organic. Anyway, what I've done is I've got two images from that tree, and although I've been surrounded by blossom lately, these blossom pictures were some that I took a while back, and they're just lovely. And so what I've done is I've drawn up the blossom large scale, and I've drawn up the blossom actual size. And when the blossom comes out, the leaves are juvenile, the blossom is small and delicate and fragile, and it's quite nice as well if you're doing a botanical study to show the actual size of the plant if you are going to do an enlargement. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because when I did my paintings for a gold medal, which I got, which was amazing. The reason I got my gold medal was because even though I'd done enlargements of flowers, I had actually included the actual size of the plant. And at this sort of strange time with judging changing and becoming much more precise, in other words, they're looking for very, very accurate portrayals of the plant. They like actual size, and so because I'd done it enlargements, the fact that I'd include the actual size got me through the door, if you like, for that gold medal. Anyway, I'm not bragging, but that's a really good thing to know. If you are doing enlargements of flowers, nowadays when it comes to this sort of RHS judging, they are, I think, looking for some size guide so that you can identify the plant. Because it'd be wonderful if blossom was this big, wouldn't it? It'd be wonderful if it was a huge, great big flower. But it's not, it's lovely and it's small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the actual size here, and then I'm going to do one of the flowers from the enlargement so that you can see how to do it, and then I'll complete it off camera and we'll show you the finished painting of that cluster there. And that way you can sort of push yourselves to have a go at the extra pieces on your own. I'm hoping that will work. If not, you'll let me know, I expect. But anyway, let's start with mixing our colours for this beautiful little blossom. So I'm just going to mix up some very pretty pinks. And I've got Rose Madder Lake here, which is a lovely sort of reddish pink. And then I'm going to add to that a little bit of Helios Purple, which is actually quite a sort of pinky purple. And if you mix those two together, you get the prettiest pink. And I'll just water it down with a little bit of water, and you can see you get this lovely pink. And I think actually we need some more purple in there just to make it slightly bluer. Now the reason I say bluer is because obviously if you add red and blue together, you do get a sort of purple, don't you? Not a pretty one, I don't think, so it's nice when you add a magenta and blue. And this is a bluey magenta. So we're just offering that up. If I just offer that up to the camera, you can see we're getting a little bit bluer. Now I'm going to add some cobalt blue, just to make it slightly bluer again. We're getting there, aren't we? A little bit more purple. So you're just adding in these colours little by little, just so that you don't overdo it and then end up with something too strong. And if it starts to get too dark, just water it down on the edge, and that way you can match it. I think we're there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that as my main source of colour, and then I'm going to have a really hot, pretty pink, which I'm going to use Opera Rose up here in the corner with a little bit of Rose Madder. And that gives us this very bright, sort of, you know, joyous pink, if you like, for that tiny little area. So obviously it's very small, and what you need to think about when you're doing small paintings is you don't want to put too much water on because the colour will go everywhere. So it's all about tempering your brush. So you put the right amount of paint on to get the little flood. And the other thing you want to do is you don't want to do too much in one little area. So it's really a matter of discipline now that you're going to zip around this tiny little flower and get the sort of feeling of it, and then come back and do the detail. So I've got my lovely little array of pinks, and I'm just going to make a little wall there between the two of them because they're getting a bit too friendly. Use a bit of tissue paper to do that. And then the other colour that we need over in this corner will be a mid-tone. So we're looking for this very soft grey that we're getting right in the sort of creases where the petals are really white. So I'm going to use French ultramarine, a little bit of Sennelier yellow, and a little bit of Sennelier red. So a bit more blue than the other two. And then we want just a tiny puddle of that because we want it very, very pale. If I put this onto the card, you'll see it's quite pale there. So nothing stronger than that. If you end up mixing a big puddle of brown, just take wipe away most of it and just add some water and just add a tiny bit more blue, and that should give you a nice grey. So we're going to be using our fine liner and a number 2 brush today. Oh, that's my 4. They're liking one another today. And I'll just give them a little wake up. Now I'm working from this little photograph. Obviously, if you can get it up onto an iPad or a phone or something like that, you'll get a little bit more vibrance and you'll be able to sort of scroll in and see all the detail. I have printed off the larger one up here, so I know what's going on in the middle, but also this one's a little bit further on, so the stamen is a little bit more mature, so it's going to be a very sort of ditzy little dotty affair that we're going to be putting on at the end, nothing too major. So we're going to start by putting a little bit of water onto this petal here. Now this is all about just getting the right amount, so just tap it, a little bit of puddle, there's some fluff that's coming with it, a little tiny puddle in the centre of the petal, and then just bring it up to the edge of the drawing, like so. It's all about getting the right amount of paint onto your brush. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that grey and just tap it very gently up to that edge, but just bring it across, lay the brush back a bit so it's covering a little bit more paper, and just drag it across the petal like so. And when you get to about there, clean your brush and just pick up a little bit of that main pink. Actually, I'm going to pick up a little bit of the bright pink instead. I think it's brighter pink on that edge. And just continue with the pink. We're painting in a very warm studio today because it's a beautiful sunny day outside. So things are going to evaporate quite quickly. So you do need to prepare the paper with the water a couple of times so you've got plenty of play time. Now, if you can, stop before you reach the pencil. So just put your colour towards the pencil because we don't want too much pencil held underneath the pink. Because as you know, pink makes pencil permanent. So you just want to very gently bring that up to there. Now, we don't need to lift anything. We've just put the very basic light grey on there. So what we want to do is we want to just quickly zip round and do each petal like that. So it's going to be a nice, fast project for you. So I'm going to do these 4 very pale petals, exactly the same, a little bit of water, drop on the grey, drop on the pink, and just soften it out and try not to fiddle. And just like I say, keep it very soft, keep it very cloudy, and try and just put a little bit of paint on each one, just so you just don't overdo it. Don't think you have to go so dark so soon. We'll come back and have a look at this one here, which is mainly pink, and again we do the same thing, just a nice quick glaze. And this one's really important that you don't get too much pink over the white part of the petal. If it goes too pink in the middle here, it won't look realistic. So we're going to stir up the bright pink, but just water it down. So just take a little bit from the edge and just water it down. And we'll put this colour here. And you can see how it's sort of feeding forward. That's quite nice. We want that to happen. Tap through there. And we're just going to stop about there and just mix a little bit of grey into the pink, and maybe just sort of tap it like this, little tiny dots through here, just to get a little bit of that change in colour there, and then a little bit of the grey around the neck here. And then what I'm going to do is just wipe through to maintain that little pale stripe down the centre, and wipe through here just to get some little highlights on those little crinkles. And what you can do here is with the tip of a dry brush, so to clean your brush, roll it on the dab pad so it's nice and pointed, and then just run that through the settling pink very, very lightly. You'll get a lovely little delicate white line appear. Do it fairly swiftly, so soon after you've put the colour on, because otherwise it sets really hard and it's very difficult to get any texture on there. So we're going to do this one down here, which is a little bit more intense. A little bit of water. Now notice I'm not taking away my pencil lines today. I have drawn this with a 2H, and what I'm going to do is get these first colours mapped on and then let it dry completely and then remove the pencil, because it's such a tiny little thing. I think we'll be all right. So I'm going to pick up that really bright tarty pink. So that's my mother's description of any pink that's brighter than normal. And we'll drop that. Oh, it's not wet enough. So if that happens where you put your colour on and it just sits there, quickly grab some water and do another glaze. That's what happens in a warm atmosphere. You think you've put enough on and you haven't. You're going to pick up a little bit of that lovely bright pink and just tap it very gently like that. And I'm going to take some pure Opera Rose, just straight from the puddle, and just drop that right on that corner there where it really sings out. Then quickly clean your brush, take the water out of the brush so it's nice and damp and pointy, and then you just tease through very lightly like that to get a little bit of shape and tease some of that colour forward like so. And I'm going to take some of the watered down pink, jump over here and just a little bit more watery, and just drop on a little tiny bit more pink just there, leaving that little flash of white. I think Blossom is always my favourite thing. You know, it's just one of those lovely signatures that May is just around the corner, and all of those wonderful things are going to happen in the garden. And I'm just going to take some of that very light bright pink and just put that other half of that petal just with a very light glaze. Tiny little dabs. You can see I'm only using the tip toe of my brush and just dabbing that forward. So the next thing to do is to map in the petals that are similar to that. So a little bit of water, put on your extra colour where you need it. If you need to pull out any little detail, you, as soon as it's settled, quickly swip through with the point of your brush. And if you want to practice this, then you can take one petal and just do repeats of little petals across the page and just try that technique again and again until you feel happy with it. So I'm going to carry on just mapping in the ones that are similar, and when we come to something completely different, I'll come. So you can see that that's quite a nice simple little job. You just keep going round and round in circles, finding a similar petal and just adding that little bit of pink on. And this is actually quite a nice project to do if you're just getting to grips with putting the wet in wet, because they're nice and small areas and it's nothing too scary. So we're going to come back up to the top here for this little petal here, which is a little bit more textured, and so we're going to use a different technique just to try and get a little bit more texture. So I'm going to put the water on first, like we always do. Make sure there's no puddle. And I'm going to stir up that darker pink that we mixed at the beginning and get the concentration of the colour right on the tip toe of the brush. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run that along the edge to create a nice dark edge on this petal. Like so. Then I'm going to mix a little bit of my pink, my bright pink, with the dark pink and jump the lights. So there's a little band of soft light there, which I'm just jumping. And then with the light bright pink, just bring that very gently in little strokes like that towards the centre. And if you keep it nice and simple like that, just bringing it forward, and then just with a clean damp brush, just tease that down into that little niche there, so you stay nicely in control. And then just as that dries, rather than wiping out, we're going to use that same dark pink and just have the brush barely wet. So you pick up the colour from the drier part of the puddle and just tap it on the flannel like so. And then very lightly through there, through that little highlight, we're going to just pull through with the brush right on its tiptoe like that. We're going to pull through some little Y's, that's little Y like that, like, and then pull through just to get some of those little teeny weeny veins coming around in the shape of a fan, like so. And then I'll do the same with the bright pink. Last of the bright pink, I'll need to mix up some more, and then pull from where you left off, pull that little bright pink down towards the centre, little bit of extra detail on that one just to make sure that we've got that highlighted, a feature petal that is. So what I'm going to do now is just dance the brush over as it dries out, just to add a little bit more colour at the top. So we're going to use that same technique on the other little petals that have that more textured finish, and then we'll come back and have a look at putting in some of these little windows, and that way we can sort of think about getting rid of some of that pencil. So one last little petal just to map in, and that's on this edge here. And I'm not going to put the water on first because it's such a tiny little area. I'm going to pick up this dark pink and just run that very gently along the edge like so. This is where the petal is curling upwards and it's got a little bit of a dark edge like so. And then quickly with a little bit of water, just run the water behind it like that. And then we're going to pick up some of the brighter pink and run that on the curve underneath so that the two meet in the middle where the water is. And then we just wiggle through like so. So you get a nice little lozenge of pink. So let's do those little windows while we think about it. And what it is where the petals separate and join, so they're joining around this lovely little sort of gentle shape, which I haven't drawn in, but you could sort of indicate it slightly. I won't use that pencil, it's a bit blunt. Let's find a nice sharp pencil. So it's sort of got this sort of pretty little pattern like so, where everything comes off the launch pad in the centre. And we've got these lovely little windows of green, which is the little sepals behind, nice and furry they are. So let's mix up that little bit of green that we need for that. And it only needs to be a tiny little puddle. So we'll use some phthalocyanine blue and a little bit of lemon. Just so you've got that nice sort of minty green there. And I'm going to add a little tiny bit of rose madder to it just to sort of dull it down, maybe give it a little grey tinge. And then a stronger green, I'll use some French ultramarine and some Sennelier yellow. Sennelier yellow deep. Ugh, I think I said that properly and I didn't. And then we're adding a little bit of phthalocyanine blue and a little bit of lemon. So the 2 yellows and the 2 blues that I use mainly for my greens, so get a nice dark green in a teeny weeny puddle. We'll use a little bit of water, just a tiny little tap of it, then this very pale green grey, just going side to side there, and a clean brush in the middle. It's so subtle, just a tiny little whisper of green there. And just run around doing those little windows. I might make this one a bit bigger. Sometimes the precise shape of them can be lost in translation. By that I mean lost from transferring it onto the paper. A little bit of that green there, and then I'm going to mop out the middle to get a nice little edge around it. And so on. I'd go around here and do all of these in a minute, but when we come to this one here, where the little yellow stamen are on there, we need to go around a couple of those so we don't lose that highlight. Tiny little bit of that green there. It's a dabbing motion with the brush really. You could do a dry brush, but it's going to drag, and I think just that little bit of wet in wet for that very small area is quite useful. And then I'm picking up the dark here where we get this lovely little pointy darkness just there. And let that dry, and when you come back to that one you can put some more dark onto it. And the dark green is just what's going on behind the flower. The pale dusky green is the actual sort of furry inner side of the sepal that you're seeing. Again here I'm being careful to leave a little space in the middle where the stamen come through. Okay, probably by the time you get round to this 5th one, the first one will be dry. If it's a bit darker, just leave it on there. So I'll go back to that one at the top. I'm just going to add a bit more French ultramarine just to make it a tiny bit darker and a bit more Snellia yellow. And we'll just put this little dark corner in. So this is dry now, so we can put that extra little bit of darkness in here. And soften, and then over here we can do the dark interior window. So I'll just finish that little bit off down here, and then we'll let the whole thing dry, and then we'll come back to you when we want to remove some of that pencil. So remember, just do those little windows one at a time going around. They'll dry really quickly. By the time you get round to your first one again, it'll be dry. Continue until you've got that mapped in, and then leave it to completely dry before you come back to any erasing of pencil. So I've removed the pencil, which was a little bit nerve-wracking, but don't be afraid. And what we're going to do now is we're going to come back and put in a little bit of detail, and we're going to use a process called dry brushing, which we've covered in many projects. And this is very gentle, very soft, very small, and you want to take your time on this, just little amounts. And I'm just going to add a little bit more of that Opera Rose up there, but I'm just going to use what I've got on the palette because it's dried out, being such a warm day anyway. And what you want to do is just work your way very methodically through here. So a combination of texture and detail. And what I'm going to do is just stir up very, very lightly that pale pink and just roll my brush to a tiptoe. And what I'm going to do is work around the flower, putting on those very fine veins. So you want your brush right on its very tiptoe. You want to home in, if you can, enlarge your screen if you're working from a computer, and if not, then you can use a magnifying glass for your photograph, or if you're working from life, even better. And what we're going to do very light, almost hardly any paint on there. You need to have some paint on there. We're going to keep our brush right on its very tip-toe, and they've almost got to be so faint you can barely see them. They're very, very delicate. A little bit of fluff on the end of my brush. We'll get there in the end. So we're looking at little Ys. No, I still haven't got enough paint on my brush. Wah wah. And little Ys, that's it, like so. And then they work their way down, and then a lower Y as you come around the edge. You'll see them, they're very gentle. And I'd rather there were less than too many. You just want to put on as many as you think you need to describe what's going on onto that petal. They're very subtle. You can see I'm working my way around the little cluster, just using the brush really super light and feathery, and trying to put on the veins that you need, that you can see. Don't put all of them on, otherwise it will look a little bit too anatomical. What we want is something that's very subtle, because you'll only see the veins where you see the veins anyway. And just keep the brush really, really high, but also look at where the veins go. Don't get carried away putting lots of veins on in the wrong direction. So really look at that fanning process where they go around. Remember that we're keeping the brush on its tiptoe, as I say, but also you've got to look at how the veins describe the shape. So if they're curved, then curve them. And I was going to show you on this one here, if we grab a little bit of that colour, this is showing that the petal is curving this way. So we want to get that really lovely curve of the veining to describe that it's curving that way. So if there's a curve, got the main veins in, then just keep tapping on a little bit of the little bright pink. Dry the brush out, and as it's dry you can just tap on a little bit of dusty colour over the top just to bring up that tone. So you dampen your brush, pick up a little bit of your colour. I'm just using a little bit of Opera Rose. Flatten your brush out, tap it on the dab pad, and then very lightly, wherever you want to build up the colour, you can just tap very, very gently like that, just to bring up that little bit of pink. Little taps, little bits of dry brushing, and that way you don't get too many straight lines, you just get a nice little brushed, ditty bit of colour coming through. Ditty, that's a new one. And if you needed to soften any marks, just use a damp brush and very quickly just soften over with a little bit of water. That way, anything that you put on that's a bit heavy, you can just adjust it. You can use this little bit of dry brushing as well, just to define some of those little skinny petals that are on the edge. So you can just give them a little bit of a touch here and there, just to build up some of the colour and show which way they're. So now we've got all of that lovely little pink detail on, what we can do is we can wake up our mid-tone grey and we can add some more of those little shadows, because as the shadow colour dries you can see that sometimes it's not dark enough and you sometimes want to sandwich that detail in between little layers of shadow. So that's what we're going to do, and I'm going to put a little bit of shadow on and then soften it, as opposed to putting water on and then adding the shadow. That way I know if I've put enough on. So I'm going to put a little bit of shadow on this bit here, right next to there, and then very quickly clean the brush and just catch that edge. That's nice, and that just brings that little petal curling forward and just knocks it into that tiny little shadow area. And then we can beef up this bit of shadow down here as well, little strokes like that, and just tease it out into the petal. We've got a little bit more control when it's dry, and then a little sweep down. Roddy's eating a lolly. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work our way around the flower, and everywhere where you see a little bit more shadow is required, sweep it on and soften. And don't get too carried away, work your way around, because you might find by the time you've got back to the first petal you can actually repeat the process one more time. You can use this grey also to your advantage on the edge, because obviously we've got to lift these flowers off the paper. So where you get to the edge of the petals, any little shadow that comes near to the edge, maybe go just a tiny bit darker and then just soften it in as before, but just leave that tiny little flash of dark right on the edge, and that way it just gives the illusion of the petal coming through from the light behind. So I'm just going to take a tiny little bit of artistic license and just put a little bit more grey just along this edge, just a tiny bit, like so. So down here where it's a little bit more grey over the top of the pink, I'm just going to use that to define this edge, and then with a damp brush just sweep back up. So I think we're ready now to mix up some greens for the leaf. So the leaf is very, very detailed on this side. So I think we'll start with that one because that's the most complicated. So what I want to do is I want to clean my palette of that dark pink. I'll leave a little puddle of it just in case we need some more later on. And we want to mix up a nice dark green. Where's my mixing brush? Where are you? It's gone again. There he is. I just use my mixing brush, and I'm going to start with some French ultramarine, Sennelier Yellow Deep. Give it a good wiggle so you get plenty of colour off, because it's quite a dark leaf, it's quite a rich leaf. We have actually painted the leaf before. And we did the apple with the leaf, so we have actually got that that particular leaf done in detail. But this one's quite nice because it's sort of rich and dark and small and busy. It's not the mature leaf, it's a little busy, fresh, small leaf. So I've got that colour mixed up. I'm going to just try it on a piece of paper and offer it up to my photograph. That looks pretty good. I'll just show the camera that you can see that's a nice colour for in here, and then we want a darker colour for near to the flower and a slightly lighter colour for the outer edge. So I'm going to take a bit of that to one side, add some more French ultramarine, and then that colour with lots more lemon. So we've got some little satellite colours there to use. Okay, let's put that over there. So I'm going to stick with my number 2 brush because it's a good size for such a small leaf. And what we're going to do is we're going to glaze. There's a little bit of another leaf, the underside of a leaf just there, so I'm going to glaze around that. Put a really good puddle through the middle. Now there's a very subtle quilting on this. It's quite a new young leaf, so there's a lot of detail on there, but we're going to try and achieve it as quickly as we can so that you get used to the idea of lifting out the veins. So a good quantity of water onto the leaf. Make sure it's nice and even, and then just a little quick mop up. You don't want any puddles on there. I'm going to pick up the dark green and tuck that in right next to that petal so we get that lovely contrast next to the pink petal. And I picked up the other green, which we're going to lay alongside it. And I purposely didn't do a lot of the serrations on the leaf because I wanted to do those as we painted it. So I'm just going to work my way around that little underneath of a leaf there. And we'll just go down this side because we've got lots to do on each side. So we'll just flick that green on. And then when I get near to the edge, I'm just going to sort of slightly push the brush out, very gently, nothing precise at this stage, but just slightly pull it out to get the start of the serrations. And then when we come back with a bit of detail, we can add more. And while that's settling, I'm just going to run my brush along that midrib, just to soften away the green that's gone to the other side. And then very quickly with a clean damp brush, you're going to run the brush very lightly through the green just to lift a little bit of light next to the veins. Clean your brush in between each lift and make sure you take all of the water off. It doesn't matter if it looks a bit stripy at this stage, it's a matter of just getting that highlight because we're going to put some detail over the top, so all of that will get melded into underneath all the detail. So just pulling that colour out. Just a little bit of lifting up here towards the edge. So we have the start of the leaf, which is quite important. Now that's going to dry very quickly, and don't worry if it's a little bit harsh, as I say, just let it relax, let it dry, and then very quickly you can sweep on some more water on the other side and do the same on the opposite side. So I'm going to start with the darker green, not the very dark green, the mid green. I'm going to use that to define the edge around here. Take that up along the edge of that petal and right up next to the midrib. It's all very fiddly, but it's quite nice, it's quite rewarding. And what we'll do is sweep that down. Just drop it on like that, nice and simply. If you get a puddle, just dry your brush off and just mop it up ahead so that you don't want to be chasing the paint across such a small leaf. And then as I get nearer to the edge, I'm going to pick up the lighter green. So we've used all three colours. And as I say, just an indication of the serration at this stage. Just pulling it just slightly over the edge there, down into the point. Give it a little moment, and on this side, rather than lifting out the highlight, we're going to be lifting through the veins. So with your brush on its tiptoe, you're going to lift out a very fine line. Run the damp tip of the brush down and draw the vein through the paint. So it's a damp brush, careful to keep it on its tiptoe because you don't want the line too wide, and then run through. You can guesstimate the distances, it's very easy once you get into the swing of it. If it doesn't come off the first time, just run the brush through the same line once more. And then you can run down the middle to reveal the midrib. Now while we're waiting for that to dry, what we're going to do is just map in these other leaves, and there's not much detail on those at this size, so we're going to put in this lovely dark green through there, this lovely minty green going into the dark there, and all you do to make it minty is just add a little bit more phthalocyanine blue, and the same minty green down here for this little leaf down here, and just remember to keep the light as that leaf curls away. Off we go. So we're at the point now where I've mapped in the other leaves, and you can see I've been a little bit shabby on the edges, but that's okay. So long as you've got them sort of indicating that they are going into a serration, then you can slow down and do the serrations at your ease afterwards. So what we want to do is we want to come back to this leaf over here and do a few little fiddly bits to it. So I'm going to use a bit of kitchen towel and my eradicator, and what we're going to do is we're going to irritate out some of the, I'll put that brush down, we're going to irritate out some of the little veins that come down across through the lateral veins. I think what we'll do is we just use the eradicator straight away. You can use the tip of your brush and that can work really well, but actually the eradicator is probably easier to use. So using it on its edge, you just wipe through very, very lightly like that. You might not even need to dab because the green lifts very well, and you just wipe through 2 or 3 little strokes in the same place should irritate the paint out enough just to show the veins. Again, we're not putting everything in, we're just putting the main veins that you can see. And really do try and look at the position of them and the angle of them and get that right. So they're coming across between these major veins coming out to the side. And if you don't see them, don't pull them out. So I'm going to do a little bit on this side. It's more of the highlight, so I'm making a slightly fatter line. And we'll glaze over them so they won't be so bright. So this isn't a vein, this is a little highlight in between the veins. Just see it's coming off quite easily. I haven't done any dabbing really. And where it goes into the dark, we don't need to lift anything out. Maybe 1 or 2 veins coming down here. Okay, now we've done that, we come back to our fine brush now. I'm going to use my very fine liner and just take a little bit of water into your colour. Nice thing about doing a small study is you very rarely run out of paint. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do the shadow on the darker side where it cushions over. So the leaf actually cushions over like this, and what we're going to do is just very gently just tap on some darker colour and jump the veins. Camera will be up close here, and that's when I get nervous because actually it's very intense and it looks so shabby very, very close up. It looks all okay from here, and then when you get close up you think, oh, that doesn't look quite so detailed. But anyway, we have to show you what we're doing close up. So what I'm doing here is I'm just jumping in between the veins, and then I'm going to drag a little bit of the colour up alongside the veins to make them a little bit thinner. Just tiny little strokes like that, just to reduce the size of them. Now don't work on one area for too long. Just use your fine liner and jump around to different areas, allowing each little part to dry. So when we go up into the dark here, I'm going to mix up my dark colour, just make that wetter, and just run through. We can't actually see the veins, we can only see the dark that they're sitting into. So I'm just going to run a very fine line like so through that darkness, just to show that dark space that it's sitting into. And then with the veining, I'm going to just drag a little bit of dark like that, but also next to the highlight I'm going to put a little dark line where the little sort of gap that the vein is sitting into, the little dip. So what you're going to do is you're going to work very methodically, just painting in just one or two little areas here and there. Change the green to mid-green if you need it, or a light green if you want it. And if you put any marks on that you want to soften, don't be afraid to soften with the fine liner as well. So I'm just going to just show you very quickly along here. We put that little shadow there, we can jump over, you put a little line, and then you can just tap on that little shadow too. And when you get to the veins, you jump over them. Don't worry if you miss a vein or you accidentally paint over it, because you can lift it out again afterwards. It's just nice to have that opportunity to keep it nice and neat if you need to. If you're having a little break and waiting for things to dry, you can also use your fine liner to start perfecting those serrations. And what I tend to do is just bring out the serrations very gently, a little tiny triangle like that, and just fill in behind, and then just soften it back into the leaf. Is where I've lifted out the highlight, you can soften it in a little bit. So just using the eradicator, you can just very gently just tap next to that and make it a little bit softer. Luckily, because the painting is so small and the area is so small, it only takes a little tiny dab of the brush. So we'll let that dry. Well, the reason we want that to dry is because we're going to put a little glaze over the top of it in a minute. Well, you can finish doing more little fine veins if you've not got to that point yet. Just continue adding more detail, and then if you allow it to dry, you can go around and do all of the serrations nice and neatly for your other leaves, and that way it'll be dry enough for us to put a little glaze over the top when we come back. So little tiny bits of feathering if you want to, and intermittently you can come back and add more detail or lift more detail out. But you can see it's quite rough at the moment. What I want to do is I just want to add on my sharpness around all of my other serrations, lift out any lights that I need, and then we'll come back and put a little glaze on that, and the last bit will be our tiny little stamen right in the middle. last little corners of green here and there, and that also helps define the edge of the blossom hither and thither. So what we want to do now is just do a little glaze over that leaf to knock back the detail, because there's not a great deal of what I call really loud detail in that. So we just want to just soften it in and maybe freshen up the leaf here and there. So I'm just doing my last little fiddles here with that brush, and then what I'm going to do is go back to my number 2 brush and very lightly mix up a little bit more lemon into my green, and I'm just going to very lightly drag a light green glaze over this bottom half, just very, very soft, so you don't dislodge anything, you're just building up that colour and sort of slightly tinting the veins to a different colour. And then I'm going to add some phthalocyanine blue, make it a slightly mintier green for the top half, and just drag that over the same over there. And then we'll let this settle and work on our centre. So I'm going to go back to my fine liner. I'm going to mix up with my mixer a sort of peachy yellow colour. So I'm going to take some lemon and mix it with my Opera Rose for that peachy colour, and then a little bit of lemon on its own down here. Oh, that's nice and bright, isn't it? And then what we're going to do is use our fine liner nice and clean and just drop in those tiny little anther heads. And what I want you to do is want you to just map in where you see them first, and then when they're dry you can then come back and add a bit more detail. They're very small, so what detail we can put on them will also be very small, but it's worth just dropping them in hither and thither, making sure that you've got them in the right place and that you've highlighted everywhere that they poke out. And then we can come back and put a bit of detail on there. So I can change from the orange to the yellow depending on what I'm putting on. And you can map these out with the tracing paper if you want to, but I think a bit of freestyle doesn't hurt at this. What I've done is I've watered down the lemon for the filaments. So once you've mapped in where the anthers are, you can drag the filament back home. And you can add a little bit of blue to the orange, and then add a little bit of red as well, just a tiny amount, and you'll end up with a nice little bit of brown, which you can use for the darker parts. So anywhere where you see a little bit of deepening, and you can also use that just to give a little bit of a bit of texture or outlining to some of these as well. So let those dry, and you can use that brown or the green to give a little bit of shadow or definition to some of the other little areas here and there, and let them dry, and then come back with your lovely sort of pale minty green that we started with for the little openings, and then you can dance that very gently, not too wet, just dance it very gently around the anthers just to colour in behind it. Just a little tap here and there and just bring that colour around, because we left a little bit of space and now we just need to reduce that brightness. I'm going to use some of the grey, the little mid-tone, just to put on some extra little bits of veining on the whiter part of the petals, here and there. Just can drag that on very lightly, just to give a little bit of texture through those white sections of the petals. Just adds that extra little bit of detail that we're looking for at this stage. And you can keep looking through your eyelashes. It's a good way of seeing whether you've got the tone right. And if you can see any darker patches that you've maybe missed out on, you can then add a little bit more detail to those areas. Here and there, if you fancy, if you sort of squint your eyes and see that maybe it needs to be a slightly deeper pink, you can do a little glaze of the pink over the top of your detail. Just make sure that when you're doing that, that you soften any edges so that you don't end up with any watermarks on your petals, because that's always a little bit not preferable. So I'm just putting a little bit of pink here and there just to sort of beef up the pink where I see it, and plopping it on like that, and then very quickly just softening the edge. One of the other things you can do as well to perfect your little study is you can use a bit of kitchen towel and your eradicator, and anything that's dried with a hard edge or a watermark, you can just wiggle and dab that away. So a little damp eradicator, any edges that you want to perfect, it's quite nice just to sort of go around, and if you want to retain a brighter edge you can, or maybe get rid of a hard line, or maybe even just make something just that little bit brighter. Just a little wiggle and then dab with a clean bit of kitchen towel. So I would normally go over the whole area, and I would even, if I was putting it into an exhibition, I would go and look with a magnifying glass and see all the bits that I haven't done perfectly and attack those as well. And don't feel like you have to do that, because sometimes the watercolour is just lovely as it is. And I was reading in one of my books the other day about mediums and artworks, and it was saying that there should be a good image and the medium should really be inseparable. They should make each other work. So in other words, the watercolour and the subject matter suit one another so well, and that's what's lovely about watercolour and flowers, is they seem a perfect match for one another. Obviously that's my preference, and there are some beautiful mediums like colour pencil and oil and all the rest of it. I just think watercolour and flowers is a really nice. So the last little bits of detail that you can do will be just to come back to your stamen and use a little bit of, you could use something like quinacridone gold with a little bit of green, and just add a little bit of texture or a few more little dots into the stamen, so that you get that little feeling of the pollen being sitting right on the surface. So just a little bit of texture into those anthers at the top. The rest is just fiddling around and making everything perfect. So once we've got our lovely little study, our actual size all finished, and now the next thing to do is to do one of the blossoms really big, so you get an idea of how to use your watercolour a bit more dramatically. So we're moving on now to the enlarged flower, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this floret here so that you can do the rest on your own, hopefully. And I just think it would be really nice to challenge yourself to do the completed painting on your own. But I chose this side to do because we've got the nice balance between the highlight and the cast shadow, and we've also got all the stamens, so it's quite an intriguing one to do, but it's also should be theoretically a little bit faster to do because it's a bigger flower. So we're going to mix up some colour. I'm going to mix up some lovely pink. I'm going to use, I'm just cleaning up my Opera Rose. I'm going to use the Opera Rose. I cleaned up my palette because I want a nice big space for mixing. It's always quite nice to have a bigger space. I'm going to use Opera Rose, slightly different colour mix this time with my Helios Purple. So those two bright colours together. Now you might say to me, why, Billy? And I think it's because those two colours spread really nicely, and when you're working on a big area you want that lovely spreadable appeal. So we've got that. We're going to use water for the highlight, and we just need our grey. So we're going to use the French Ultramarine with a little bit of Sennelier yellow and some Sennelier red. And if you mix a green or a brown, just add a bit more blue. Until you get a lovely steely grey, and then we'll water that down. So we're going to use, for this big painting, we're going to use a number 6 brush. I'm going to put a nice big glaze over this main petal. So put a really good reservoir through here. It's a completely different kettle of fish because it's such a big area. It's still a very warm day, and so we need to make sure there's plenty of water. And I'm just going to go around the stamen because I just want speed, and they're big enough, they've been enlarged enough for me just to work around them. If I can avoid using masking fluid, I will. So make sure you get a nice big reservoir of water in there. This is the place where it will dry out the quickest in between all of these, so make sure you plop a little bit of extra water where it gets really thin. When I mean thin, I mean narrow, a little narrow space. And then just put my head on the side just so I can see the reflection of the water, and bring it as close to the pencil line as you can. So this is very subtle painting as well. Even though it's an enlargement, we're still not going very dark with our colour, and you still need to know how much paint to have on your brush to know how far it's going to move. So I'm going to give that a little stir. This is the pink, and I'm just going to lay it along the edge and see how it gets on. A little bit strong, but don't forget that it will fade. So it's sitting on there quite nicely, which is good. We don't want it to be too dark at this stage. So bring your brush up to its tiptoe when you get to the edge and just run the brush along, just to smarten it up. Don't worry if it does go over the edge, just push it back like that with your fingertip. Work as swiftly as you feel you can. If it starts to look like you're putting paint onto dry paper, then stop and just add a little bit of extra water ahead of you. I'm going to water that pink down just a little bit more so it's barely there, and just run a little bit of pink through here for the shadow. And just very gently, just lighten through there. What I'm doing is I'm taking a damp brush and I'm just going to mop a little bit of that colour away. It's just a little bit too heavy there. And if the paint has gone into an area that you want to keep white, then just go from the edge and just sweep it back like that, nice and gentle. Each time you do that, clean your brush thoroughly and wipe it out so that you haven't got any water on there. If you have any puddles, just mop it very gently like that with the tip toe of the brush. That will take the puddle away. And you have a little moment as well where you can just perfect the edge if you need to. So looking through my eyelashes and seeing that it's still a little bit soft, I'm going to put a very, very pale pink just coming up into here, just the lightest colour, and just give it a little bit of colour where it goes in near the stamen. Just a hint of pink. You take a little bit of time here, just slow down and just fill in. Make sure that nothing's leaving any watermarks or anything like that. If you've lifted out and you've got a line, then just very gently sweep that away. So I'm going to give it a few seconds to dry, and it's very warm in here, as I say, so it won't take very long. And then I'm just going to run my brush through to create some little pockets of light. And we're just going to try it up here where it's driest. Just a little sweep like that. You see it's coming out quite sharp there. But I'm going to do a couple of little sweeps like that, and a couple of little sweeps in between, just to get a little bit of texture through there. And then just a couple of little ones down here, slightly interlocking, so a long one and a short one, just to sort of recreate that slight pattern that you can see. So that's all we can get away with while it's drying, and it's sort of gone to that point where that's as much as we can lift off, and pink becomes permanent very quickly. So that's a really good start. We've got a good tone on there. We haven't got any shadow on there yet, but it's just really established it as pink. So what I want to do now is I want to jump up to this petal here. We've got a really big bright highlight through here. So I've got this flash of really strong pink, then this soft baby pink, and then a bright highlight, and then the soft baby pink to make the curve. But it's all done in quite a nice small area. So we'll put a lovely glaze again across that. This is why I chose this one to do, because it has all the variations that we're looking for in one flower. So again, a really good soaking, and run the brush carefully around so you don't go over the edge. Check it on the side, give it another quick once over. And then you want to pick up a little bit of that opera rose, really strong, just tiny little bit there, really hot pink, and just temper it with a little bit of rose madder, just for that little bit at the back. And I'm going to drop this on first, just using the tip toe of my brush. Just going to drop that little shocking pink along there. Then I'm going to go for my watered down pink and drop that behind there. Notice I glazed the whole area. There is a line through here, but we're going to just go over that line slightly, as the colour does on the photograph. So I want those two to sort of splurge and merge together, which is what I'm after. And then I'm going to bring that pink up underneath there. And then I'm going to jump over the highlight, just go a little bit down, and put a little bit of pink along the edge. Clean your brush, take all the water out, and just wipe your brush through that highlight like that so you get a nice curve. That's the bright light that you want. And then I'm going to take a little bit of light there, just to show that that's tucking in behind there. And I've got this little feedback happening there, so I'm just going to tap that away. That's good. And then just as it's drying, you can just take a few little light sweeps through. It's not really strong enough on this edge. I'm just going to drop a bit more colour on here, just a little bit darker, and soften that in. And then what you can do is you can just pull through just to get a little bit of light curling under. It needs to be dark enough so that shows up. Just keep an eye on all the edges, make sure there's no edges that are leaving any watermarks. I'll just take a couple of little wipes through there. It's all very subtle at this stage, trying to maximise that white light. Okay. So we've got two already mapped in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map in this one down here, but this one has got this lovely deeper pink. So you're going to go from the pale pink all the way down and drop in the darker pink at the bottom, and then maybe try and keep this little edge light. And I've just noticed actually that I've come a little bit short of the edge on this one here. So before I do the next one, I'm just going to wiggle my eradicator just to push that paint right up to the pencil line. It'll dry fairly quickly, but I just don't want to have a white gap between the edge of this petal and that petal. So we're going to put the water on and then drop the colour in too, and then we'll come over here and I'll talk you through this one, which will be a little bit more. Flowers are easier because you've got room to manoeuvre around everything, whereas when it's small, it's all done on the tip of your brush, isn't it? And it's all very, very fiddly. So anyway, I'm enjoying this. It's a nice contrast. So what we're going to do now is give that colour a little wake up, give it a stir, and we're going to drop this colour in a little bit bolder in here. Just be careful there to follow the shape of the darkness, so it's a little bit darker there. Then we've got a little gap, so we're sort of jumping over the highlight in the middle. Little gap, then there. And then pick up the darker colour and go from this corner along here. Now you're going to work fairly quickly because there's a lot to do, and when there's a lot to do, there's a lot of drying time in between, which you don't want. So we're going to run through there with a damp brush, clean damp brush, as swift as you can, to create this little ridge through there, and just tease that back so it goes with the petal, very gently like that. And then down here we'll just soften this as well, so we get a little softer area coming down. We've then got a nice little highlight there. And then what's left on the brush, we'll just use that to go onto this very pale peninsula, like so. And then down the bottom, pick up a little bit more colour and drop it on. So we're sort of bringing and sculpting all at the same time, bringing the colour forward, making sure we've left little areas of light and dark, and softening as we go. and then maybe just tapping in to get a little bit of light and encouraging the paint to look like it's moving forward. And then you've got a little window of time, just the smallest amount of time, just to pull forward and sort out any edges. I've gone over the edge there, but I'll show you what we do with that in just a mo. So a little bit of housekeeping just at the top here, just pull some of that pink towards the centre there, just to get that moving in. And that way we don't have any really bright whites in the centre of the flower. Good, so I think I'm just going to take a little bit of light, if I can, just encourage a touch of light there and a touch of light there. And I'm not going to worry that it's leaving a little line, because that can be the start of the veining on the next stage. So that's quite nice, very subtle. Good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wait for, while that's drying, we're going to just run in this little area here with the stronger colour. If you've run out of colour, it's a very simple mix. It's just going to be the Opera Rose mixed with a little bit of Rose Madder Lake, nothing too dramatic. And if you want to make it slightly darker, you could add a little bit of Helios Purple. So with this one, you want to drop lots of colour on and keep that light edge. And this curls back and tucks in underneath here. So it's quite nice because it's sort of sharp in there, and it's all foreshortened. So our next stage is to mix up some grey or a deeper sort of shadow tone to the pink. So what I'm going to do is just take a bit of my shadow, just a tiny little amount, and mix it in with the pink. So I'm just creating a dirty pink. And then I'm also going to wake up my shadow colour, my mid-tone. Just going to add a little bit of cobalt blue to it, just to make it just a little bit cooler. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the shadows where I want them now. So I'm going to use the shadow with the pink for areas like this, going up from this curve here. And just put that like so. And then from where it comes over the bend there, we're just going to put some water, so that it softens into the petal going this way, but then tucks in behind that line. And we're just going to tease out a couple of little cushiony bits and put another little shadow just up there. And again, just soften them in like so. And here we just want to soften the top edge. Now, they dried really quickly, so if it does dry really quickly, take a damp eradicator and just give that a little squiggle so that they're not too harsh. That's quite nice, isn't it? Because it gives it a bit more of a cloudy effect. So we're going to use the blue-grey just to do a very quick sweep here. And again, catch the edge really quickly so you get a nice soft edge to your grey sweep. And again, if you get any hard edges, have your eradicator to hand and just wiggle away any bits that you don't like. So a little bit of the grey, we're going to go from there, just put a little bit of a dip where that petal's creased. I'm going to go from grey to pink here, put the two colours on, and then very quickly, clean brush, and just soften either side and feather it out. So that gives us a nice little pleat in that petal, which is good. And then we can use a combination of those colours or variations. You can have lots of little satellite puddles here and there where you can water it down, have it more grey, have it more pink, whichever you need, and then you just put your colour on and flick. And make sure that you don't work on one area for too long, because that way you'll make the paper tired, but also you might dislodge what you've already done. So I'm going to use my pinky grey colour and just going to put this into shadow up here. And notice up here that I've got an outline. Well, that I'm not going to worry about that until I come to put my detail on, which will be in just a mo. And when this little extra layer of colour is dry, because when this is dry, I can get rid of that overlap quite easy. So I'm going to run around and put some shadows on here and there just to make this flower come to life. And you'll notice my deliberate accidental mistake is that I've painted in the curved petal of the next door flower. But that's quite nice because it gives us an idea of how dark we need to go in here with our pinks. So you've got for that to dry, we can mix up a little bit of green. I'm going to take some lemon with some phthalocyanine blue, and I'm going to dull it down with some French ultramarine. And I just want to use that for the little bit of green that we can see through here for the sepals that you can just see tucked in there. And they're just a little bit out of focus and just sort of soften into the back of that area there. And then we can use that same colour with a little bit of grey in it, a little bit darker and dirtier, to make this little window in here. And we can use that colour again and again till we get the level of darkness that we want. There's also, I painted in very quickly one of these little filaments in pink. Well, I had it on my brush. I'm just going to put a little dash of green in there that I can see. And you can use this for the other little areas when you come to doing the bigger flower, the other flowers as well. So the next thing to do is to mix up this sort of buttery, creamy yellow colour for the anther heads. And now what we want to do is mix a little bit of titanium white. We very rarely use titanium white, but I just think it'll make just the right colour for this. So I'm mixing that with some lemon and a little bit of Sennelier Yellow Deep. And I'm going to add another little bit of quinacridone gold as well. And let's use that straight onto the paper. So I'm going to just paint those straight on. And what I want to do is I want to get these mapped in so that I can get rid of all the pencil and then sort out all the edges. So I'm putting the yellow on, and then I'm just going to wipe out with the tip of my brush a little bit of light at the top. If it's not creamy enough, add a little bit more titanium white. So the only time that I would use it is when you're creating a colour like this, a sort of very fashionable tone of yellow, I would say, right in fashion at the moment. So we're just going to map those in, and if we need a little bit of a highlight, maybe come lower than the highlight like this on this one here, and clean your brush and just use a little bit of water to tease the colour up. If you've got a very bright highlight, just keep it water towards the top. So I'll map those in. We'll use the little bit of green for the stem of the filament stems where we need those, and the pink where we need the filament stems to be pink. And then I'll come back to you. We'll clean it all up, get rid of all the pencil, and I'll come back to you and we'll start putting the detail on. Using some quinacridone gold, a little bit of pink and a little bit of blue, French ultramarine, and I've mixed that to make a sort of slight brownish colour, which you can use for all the little details in all of the anther heads. So I'm just going to dash some of that in. ready-made green, which is just made up from French ultramarine, Sennelier yellow and lemon and phthalocyanine. So I'm just going to use a little blob of that and put on a nice sort of simple green leaf down here. Because it's in the shadow, there's not a lot of detail, so I'm just going to do it very solid and just give a hint of the detail coming through, but really it's going to be all in shadow. So I'm just going to paint that close to the petal there, just to give it a nice edge, and up into this little window of green up there. Remember, the green is making the edge of the petal as well as establishing itself. So bringing the colour down, this is what I'm doing, is I'm bringing the colour down. I know there's a little curl there, but it's slightly out of focus, but I'm going to bring the colour downhill like so, as swiftly as possible. Saves me having to put water on. Now, if you've got a lot of the colour mixed up, there's a nice easy way of doing it. So you're bringing it from a very shallow area into a bigger area, and it's nice and easy to pull it downhill. And it's going to create the serration of the curve. So you just work backwards like that to create the curve. Sorry, the reference isn't that great on this. And then work back from the edge there to create the serrations coming backwards. And then the serrations slightly change and come slightly further out this way as they go around the corner, and just bring the colour up to it. This is a good way of getting a lot of colour on quite quickly in a short space of time without any tide marks. So I'm just bringing them down into the little serrations. They're a bit easier to do than those tiny serrations on the actual size. A lot easier to do, I would say. And then you just want to sort of smooth that out. And if it's gone a little bit pale at the top because it's coming downhill and it's still wet at the bottom, you can refeed up into the top part and bring it down and round to meet the wet part at the bottom. Obviously we won't do the other part until this is dried and settled. Now I'm not interfering with it too much because I want it to stay as dark as possible, but what I will do is just do a little bit of sweeping back, just a little bit at the bottom, just where it's curling round. There's a tiny bit of light shining through it there, just gives it a bit more interest as it curls round. That's the light coming through it. Just keep a little eye on it, make sure everything's drying as it should do. And try not to interfere. I'm on the edge of interfering now, so I'm going to stop. So that's quite nice, that's settling. So what I'm going to show you is what I'm going to do at the rest of the flower. When that's dry, is I'm going to remove the pencil. I can remove at the top with no worries. Just remove the pencil as best you can. Hopefully all of your detail will be dry now, so nothing will be dislodged. Try not to remove any of your surrounding drawing, if you can help it, although it's easily repaired. If you're working from a tracing, you can just trace back again. So I'm going to keep away from the wet green leaf, just in case an accident should occur. And if you can get rid of all of your pencil, that's marvellous. If you can't, and it's got stuck underneath the pink paint, then we just use the eradicator and a bit of kitchen towel, and we'll just go and wiggle the edge with a clean eradicator. And this is my favourite tip of any time, is to just wiggle it and then sweep inwards towards the flower, and that way you don't get any smudges and you don't get any pencil and you don't get any outlines. So a little wiggle and a dab. And here, where I went a little bit fuzzy over the line, I'm going to eradicate away the overspill. Takes a little bit more beating, this paper. By the way, this paper is the Saunders Waterford 400 GSM, and this is the smooth side, and I really like it. As I said, I haven't found the paper that I would leave home for, but this is a very nice paper to be using at the moment until everything else comes back into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and attack all of the edges where I've made a mess. So overlapping edges like that, and just wiggle and just dab on top. Don't sweep, because you're just lifting away the extra colour that's built up at the edges. So a little bit of irritation and a dab that way, and you can get rid of most of your mistakes at this stage. And because we haven't put a lot of pink on, we should be fine. So go around the whole flower, sorting out that, getting rid of the pencil. When it's safe to, you can get rid of the pencil down here, but we've got to still put another little bit of paint on the top of the leaf to get that finished. So work on the top part of the flower for now, and then when that's dry, you can work on the lower part. Off we go. Let's get rid of those edges. Right, well, I'm just going to map in that last little bit of green leaf. And again, I'm going to do it just wet on dry. That's wet paint onto dry paper. I'm using a slightly lighter mix, so it's a little bit lighter, stands out on top, and I'm just going to colour it in. All looks a bit scruffy at the moment, but it will be tidied up later. So I just give that a little smooth out. Like so. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the veining now. So you need to get your fine liner out, and you need to mix up some really nice pink. In fact, I might just give myself a little bit more space on the palette. Just dry that off. I'm going to mix up some Helios purple and some Opera rose. And you want a nice big puddle because you've got a lot of veining to do. And once you get into the swing of this will be really good fun. Well, if you like doing veins, that is. You might not like this bit. I hope you will, because there's a lot to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top. Just have a little look at this area here. You can only see very gentle veining on here. It's very, very soft. So it needs to be the lightest veining through there. So you just grab a little bit of the pink on your brush. Keep it really pale. And just run through, keeping your brush right on its tiptoe and over. And that's as dark as you need to go. And you're looking to create this little lovely sort of Y and lozenge pattern that also curls over and underneath into the shadow. But less is more on here. So the other veins on this one, which are also very subtle, are the ones coming down, making little sort of almost sort of diamond shaped patterns as the petals curling towards us. And these will be softened once they're dry. So we're going to do this sort of like little Y and a slightly sort of wavy and broken pattern, gradually coming over from that curl there and just nice and soft. And what we'll do is we'll just soften into those and put a little bit of cushioning either side once we've got them mapped in. So that's all about creating shape and also adding detail there and keeping it very light and very ghostly. And when you don't see them, don't put them on, because it's always nice to have something that's a little bit quiet on a busy painting. So then the bolder veins, which are in areas like this one underneath here, you can see a few of the little veins coming through. Again, giving a little bit of shape and wobbliness, a little bit of contour, but these are concave and curving in, so I'm curving them this way, slightly off to the left, to get that to look like it's curling in. And you want to sort of be thinking about this sort of long Y-shaped break, so as the veins come over, they break into little Ys. So that's as strong as they need to go, because the veins get a little bit darker towards the bottom, but generally get a little bit paler as they get towards the light. Then you've got these very bold veins which are coming across this bigger petal here, and you've got this lovely bend here where it bends back into the light a little bit anyway. So you want to use the other elements of the flower to mark where you're going. So from this stamen anther head here, you can see the Y coming close to the edge of that petal, and then breaking into the Y there. You see the letter Y clearly there, and then it's curling back on itself. So you can do it very lightly, and then when you're comfortable you've got it in the right place, be a little bit bolder, like so. And then it would curve round and connect with the more smaller broken veins coming up this way. So have a little bit of connection where it comes round, it's going to split, and it comes lightly through that light and then up to the edge of the petal. And that will give you the idea of the petal bending and curling back again. So once you've mapped in your bigger veins, the smaller ones you can sort of relax and start to put in a little bit finer as your brush starts to run out. And you will need to keep waking up your paint, it will evaporate. Just wake it up with a little bit of colour, and if it gets too pale then just mix up some more. And do watch the way these are turning and curving, because this is all going to create contour and shape through the petal, and it's very easy to switch off and start putting veins where they shouldn't be. Very easy to do that. So really keep concentrated, keep looking at your flower, and your flower will tell you where to put the veins. And if you can't see them, don't put them on. Simple as that. So we're going to work from the top and work our way down. Shouldn't take too long. We're just going to switch off, listen to some nice music, and away we go. So I've done all my veining now, and in certain circumstances I do them quite loosely because in certain areas they are quite soft and I want to put another little glaze over them. So I've just put a little tea wash over there, and I thought I'd just drop that one in just to get myself in the mood before I show you what to do. But basically you're going to water down your pink, and we're just going to choose certain areas that we can lay a very light pink glaze over, just to sort of beef up the colour, but also it softens the detail that we've just put on. And you just put a little bit on and then just soften the edge. And you need to do it very quickly and very lightly so that you don't sort of wiggle away all the detail that you've put on. It's got to be a very soft, light application. And this can give you this lovely sort of swoopy, soft glaze that makes it look more interior. So on the deeper side of the flower, it's a bit more grey, so I'm going to mix the pink and grey together and just put a little bit of that coming down through here, over the top of the little shadows that I did before, but in and around my stamen. Just make it a little stronger so you get a bit more drama there. So again, 2 little sweeps and then very quickly soften with a clean brush. And I'm using the 6 for this. In fact, I've used the 6 for all of it, apart from the veining, which does make things quicker and softer and more sweepy. There we go with that Y again. So I've done this one just a moment ago, and I'm going to do it again just to deepen it even further. And what I've done is I've gone over this corner of that petal because that's taken into the shadow as well, and you can see the petals are transparent and shining through one another, which is always nice. So we do that, soften the edge, and then you can go around the flower, squinting your eyes, looking through your eyelashes, put plenty of mascara on, even the gentlemen, and then you can see exactly where the tones are, and you can build up the colour very softly, and this will also soften and make more natural the little veins. Just in the action of this brush sweeping over them will get rid of any little full stops that you've made, and it starts to really bring the flower to life. So that's what you do at this stage. Look at the area, find where you need to go darker and sweep on the little tea wash. And you can, in some areas, if you wanted to, go a little bit brighter, like down here there's a much more sort of unctuous pinkness to it. So I'm going to put a little bit of extra pink there, and then very quickly just soften it in. So that's what I'm going to do over the whole flower. In just a moment, I just want to run through quickly what we're going to do with the leaf. That's nice and dry now, and so I'm going to wake up my green with the fine liner. And I'm just going to put on some veins, just very lightly coming through there. Now, if you're not sure what the veins do, have a little look at the ones that we did on the smaller leaf. And we get this sort of cushioned, not cushioned, like little pockets really. So I'm going to just give a hint of the pocketing and a little idea of them curling round this way. Because it's out of focus on our photograph, you could find another photograph to work from of the apple leaf. I'm just going to give a little hint of these veins. Going in the wrong direction there, getting carried away. Just a little hint. And then I'm going to use my bigger size 6 brush, flatten it out with that green, just a mid-green with a little bit of lemon in it. And once those veins are dry, I'm just going to dry brush very lightly over the top so that they become a ghost of themselves. We just want them to be a little hint of something in the darkness. This is why we call this botanical painting or botanical art and not botanical illustration, because we're using our artistic wiles. Hurrah for artistic wiles. And then the same on the curl here. I'm just going to dry brush over the curl a little bit. soften over the dry brushing just to give it a little bit of a smushiness. And when that's dry, I'll put some little veins over that as well. I don't feel like you have to do your dry brushing all in one go. You can leave it to completely dry and then come back and do it again until you get that really lovely deep darkness. So if I just grab a bit more of that green, come along. Flatten that out. You can dry brush into this very small area up here, which is what we need to get that really nice and dark. So do that green in stages, don't oversweep, otherwise you'll start to move the colour around a bit too much. And the rest of it is really just adding some small little areas of green, just to darken those little hidden areas in here. And again, I'm being quite painterly because it's slightly out of focus. I'm going to drop the colour in, then leave it for a moment, and then just soften over it. So just a little bit of push and pull with your tea washes and a little bit of dry brushing to bring up. Now a little bit around the stamen, putting a slightly warmer green to just define these little filaments coming up, who's in front of who, using a slightly olive green. And always with these, I always come back days later and sharpen things up, bring the magnifying glass in, do all of that fiddly stuff in little batches. I very rarely do it on the first day of the painting. I usually do it much later on, just looking at it, perfecting it, coming back each time, losing bits, adding bits. It's one of those things where I sort of tend not to do it all in one sitting because it all becomes a little bit overwhelming. You do have to sort of keep looking back and analysing the detail bit by bit, and looking at other references. If your reference isn't good enough, maybe looking at other references to find out what things are doing and where things should be. So I'm adding a little bit of pink to my green just to make it a little bit more olive in colour, and just adding that olive as a very light wash over these stamen to knock them back. And then we use a slightly darker pink. I'm just going to use some of my permanent magenta here to use as a shadow and outline in here, where it all gets very dark and mysterious in between all of these little filaments down here. So just a little bit of outlining and a little colour in between, and then softening. So I'm going to continue putting the rest of the detail onto this and finishing it up, and then I'm going to complete the whole cluster for you, so you'll have that as an image to look at and use as guidance. But all of processes that I've used here I will use everywhere else, so there's going to be nothing new. It's just going to be the same process and the same sequence of events. So give it a go, maybe do one flower at a time, one blossom at a time, or even if you've just started out, just do one petal and see how you get on, and maybe just repeat one petal across the page like I always tell you to do. I hope you've enjoyed this project, working small and then working large. It's certainly been a bit of a marathon, but it's been enjoyable. It's pink, it's blossomy, what's not to love? Till next time.